Okay, so everyone knows the gladiator story. Huge arena, roaring crowd, two men fighting, one wins, one loses. Thumbs up or thumbs down, somebody dies. We've all seen the movie. We think we know how this worked. We don't really. And the part nobody talks about, what actually happened to the guy who kept winning, is honestly more interesting than the fights themselves. Let me back up first, because there's a foundational misunderstanding about gladiators that needs clearing up before any of this makes sense. Most people picture gladiators as slaves thrown into an arena against their will, desperately fighting to survive. And yes, some of them were slaves, some were prisoners of war. But a genuinely surprising number of gladiators were volunteers, free men who signed a contract, surrendered their legal rights, and chose this life deliberately. By some estimates, by the height of the Roman Empire, volunteers made up around half the gladiatorial population, maybe more. Why would a free man do that? Well, that's actually the first piece of the answer to what happened when you won. Money. Real money. A successful gladiator in Rome earned prize money per fight, palm branches, cash payments, crowns. The figures that survive from Roman sources suggest a top-tier gladiator could earn in a single fight what an ordinary Roman laborer made in several months. And if you were good, if you kept winning, the earnings accumulated. There are funerary inscriptions, actual tombstones from actual gladiators that give us names, fight records, and occasionally hints at the wealth they accumulated. These weren't poor men dying anonymously. Some of them weren't, by Roman standards, doing extremely well. But money is only the beginning of it, because what a winning gladiator accumulated that was arguably worth more than money was something Romans were absolutely obsessed with: fame. And I don't mean fame in a vague general sense. I mean specific, documented, carved into walls fame. Archaeologists excavating Pompeii, the city buried by Vesuvius in 79 AD, which preserved everything exactly as it was on that particular afternoon, found graffiti all over the city walls. And a significant amount of that graffiti was about gladiators, specific gladiators, by name, with records. Salatus the Thracian makes the girls swoon. That's a real inscription, found on a real wall, 2,000 years old. Salatus is apparently, liked. Successful gladiators had fan clubs. Women wrote their names on walls. Wealthy Romans invited them to dinner. Their faces appeared on oil lamps, on pottery, on children's toys. There are Roman mosaics, expensive, painstaking works of art commissioned by wealthy households that depict specific famous gladiators by name, with their fight records listed beside them. These were the celebrities of their world, the athletes whose names everyone knew, the people crowds came specifically to see. So when a gladiator kept winning, what happened was he became famous. Actually famous, recognizably, uncomfortably followed around the market famous. Now, here's where it gets complicated, because fame in Rome came with a very specific social paradox that doesn't have a modern equivalent. Gladiators were simultaneously celebrated and legally disgraced. The Latin term is infamia, a formal legal status that meant you had surrendered your social respectability. Gladiators, actors, prostitutes, all infames. Legally, a gladiator couldn't hold public office, couldn't give testimony in court, couldn't sit in certain sections of the Colosseum. The law literally separated them from respectable Roman citizens. And yet, the same senator who couldn't legally acknowledge a gladiator as a social equal might have that gladiator's face on a lamp in his dining room. The same crowd that cheered wildly for a fighter would cross the street to avoid formal social contact with him. The adoration was real, and the stigma was real, and both existed simultaneously without anyone apparently finding this particularly contradictory. Romans were comfortable holding two completely opposing ideas about the same person. Admirable in the arena, degraded everywhere else. It's strange to sit with, but it's thoroughly documented. Now, the winning. What actually happened in the moment of victory, because this is where the movie gets it most wrong. The thumbs up, thumbs down thing, that's not quite how it worked, and honestly, the actual system was more interesting. When a gladiator went down and couldn't continue, he raised his index finger, a formal appeal for mercy. What happened next depended on several things simultaneously: how well he'd fought, how the crowd felt, and crucially, who had sponsored the games. The editor, the person who'd paid for the event, usually a politician or wealthy citizen trying to win public goodwill, and the final call. And here's the economic reality underneath the dramatic moment. Gladiators were expensive. Training a gladiator took years. Housing him, feeding him, providing him medical care. Yes, gladiators had dedicated doctors, some of the best sports medicine in the ancient world. All of that costs serious money. Killing a trained fighter unnecessarily was financially wasteful. The ludus, the gladiatorial school that owned the fighter, would charge the editor a significant fee if their gladiator was killed in the arena. Letting the defeated fighter live was often just the economically rational choice. So the crowd might have wanted blood. The crowd often did. But the editor weighed the crowd's mood against the cost of replacing a trained fighter, against his own reputation for either mercy or satisfying bloodlust, and made a judgment call. Death in the arena happened. It happened regularly, but it wasn't the default outcome of every fight. Scholarly estimates based on surviving records suggest somewhere around 1 in 10 arena bouts resulted in death. Maybe slightly higher in the most brutal periods, but the idea that every fight ended with someone dying is wrong. It's just dramatically more cinematic than the truth. When the winning fighter was acknowledged, when the crowd and editors signaled the fight was over and the victory was his, he received the palms and the crown in the arena itself, in front of everyone. That moment, apparently, was extraordinary to witness. Roman writers described the crowds, the noise, the way a famous fighter's victory could set off celebrations that spilled into the streets. And then he went back to the ludus, back behind the walls, back to the barracks that were, by Roman standards, actually reasonably comfortable. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii's gladiatorial barracks shows individual rooms, decent food, medical care, but were still functionally a kind of prison. Even the freemen who'd volunteered had surrendered their legal freedom for the duration of their contract. They couldn't just leave. They were property of the school in a very real, practical sense, regardless of their technical legal status. This is the tension at the center of the whole gladiator experience. You could be the most famous person in Rome and still not be able to walk out of your own front door without permission. Fame and captivity. Wealth accumulating in an account you couldn't freely access. Women writing your name on walls and you couldn't freely go meet them. Well, actually, that last one isn't entirely true. There's evidence that successful gladiators were allowed certain privileges, visits, freedoms. The rules bent for the famous ones in ways they didn't for the struggling ones. But the fundamental constraint remained. So what did winning enough times actually get you? What was the end game? The rudis, a wooden sword. That was the symbol of freedom. When a gladiator had fought enough, won enough, served out his contract or impressed his owners or his patrons sufficiently, he could be granted the rudis, a ceremonial wooden training sword presented publicly in the arena in front of the crowd. It meant he was done, retired, free to go. And some of them went, quietly, disappeared into Roman life, spent their prize money, tried to rebuild something resembling a normal existence carrying the permanent legal mark of infamia, but with enough money and connections that it perhaps mattered less than it might have. And some of them, this is the part that genuinely surprised me when I first read it, came back voluntarily. There are documented cases of gladiators being granted the rudis, retiring, and then returning to the arena by choice. Because the money was still good, because the fame was addictive in a way that civilian life couldn't replicate. Because, and this is speculation, but it feels plausible, the arena was the only place they'd ever been genuinely seen. Whatever you want to call that feeling, some of them apparently couldn't leave it behind.
There's a gladiator named Flamma whose tombstone survives. Syrian by origin, probably a prisoner of war originally. His record, 34 fights, 21 wins, 9 draws, 4 losses. He survived all 4 losses, which says something about either his fighting ability or his crowd appeal. He was offered the rudis 4 times, 4 separate opportunities to retire, to walk away, to be free. He turned it down 4 times, every time, kept fighting until he died in the arena at around 30 years old. We don't know why. His tombstone doesn't tell us. Maybe the money, maybe the fame. Maybe he genuinely had nowhere else to go. Maybe, and this is the reading that I find most human, even if it's unprovable, the arena was the only place in the Roman world where a Syrian prisoner of war could matter, where 50,000 people would learn his name, cheer for him specifically, carve his face onto their pottery, where he was, in some way that nowhere else allowed, somebody. 4 times they offered him the door. 4 times he walked back in. The winners of the Roman arena didn't get a clean ending. They got fame with stigma attached, money inside a cage, freedom that came with an asterisk. And some of them, when they finally got the thing they'd theoretically been fighting toward all along, when they were actually handed the wooden sword and told they could leave, looked at the door and turned around. That's not what the movie shows you.